Right, hello everyone. It looks like we're going to start a little early. The doors are shut. You've managed to sneak in, so well done. Got seats early. How many of you just watched Vizzes? Yeah, so good! Klaus won! Part of this session is, well, in fact, all of this session is all about part of what Viz is, which is dashboard design and best practice. So if you're sat here thinking, I want to be Klaus, I want to be the next Klaus, then this is a good place to be. I have nothing on him, but hopefully I've learned enough at my time just to teach you to do something slightly better. That's my aim for today. So my name is Tom Christian. I'm a solutions consultant here at Tableau. And the reason why I'm here teaching this session today is I am a dashboard designer at heart. It's something I love to do. I've used Tableau for 4 and a bit years now. And I create things that you should and absolutely should not do in Tableau. And in that time, I've learned plenty of tips and tricks that I will pass on to you today so you can go away and feel energized to create your own stuff. So today's topic is all about good design. And when I say good design, the first thing we'll start off is, what is good design? What does that even mean? Something that seems good to somebody is going to look different to somebody else. Like we just said, Klaus was incredible, he was the best. That's not subjective, but the rest of your design may be subjective of your audience. The next is, how do you achieve good design? So how do you go from nothing to something that's designed beautifully in roughly about 20 minutes? And then the last bit of today is just those tips and tricks to make sure that you can achieve good design in the easiest, most straightforward way possible. So a few key topics that we'll cover today. We're going to start with understanding design. This is a picture of me up there. So understanding the design, what does that mean? Finding the how, so finding the way to get there. We'll then look at tips and tricks, like I've mentioned. But the main thing as well is common mistakes to avoid as well. It doesn't matter if I say this is the most perfect thing in the world and repeatedly show them. It's avoiding the things that can take your dashboard off and make it wrong are the things that you should be avoiding. And the very last thing that I'm hoping to achieve with today's session is inspire you to rock out with your Viz out, both in Tableau Public and in the office. So for those of you that are fairly new to Tableau in some way and haven't discovered Tableau Public yet, go check it out. Most of the examples in today live on Tableau Public somewhere. I've referenced the authors so you can go back and look at their stuff. There are some incredibly talented people there. So how many people in this room have some form of design degree? Show of hands. 2 people. That is 2 more than last time, which is great news. This is a really good thing, by the way. First of all, I need to apologize to you both. You can cover your ears for a bit because I'm about to bastardize design. But for the rest of you, this is what we come to expect. I don't have a design degree. That may be apparent based on today's reviews of the session. But there are things that almost are expected of us now that we start using Tableau. So a customer said to me roughly about 2 years ago, and it's something that's stuck with me ever since, which is Tableau's given her a challenge. All of a sudden before, when she was using Excel, you could kind of surface up a table of data and people expect that from Excel. But people don't expect tables of data from Tableau. They expect something pretty, something meaningful. I'm not going to say that your bosses and your boss's bosses are going to expect what you just saw on stage at Viz, but all of a sudden it feels like the bar is raised, which is a good thing, right? It's the reason we're all here. We're all here to learn, to make things that are pretty and insightful. So UX and UI, user experience, user interaction, these aren't new things. These are things that you should expect when you're actually building something. But there are a few core concepts that wrap them both together. I know they're different things, designer in the room, I'm very sorry. But they are wrapped together based on these key core concepts. So the first of those is, does your creation, does your dashboard, does your design leave a good first impression? In other words, when a user goes to the content, are they going to immediately be filled with joy or confusion or anger? Is it digestible and clear? I'm going to keep referring back to this one probably more than any of the others, because not only should it leave that good first impression, that kind of wow feeling, when the user goes to actually consume the content, is the message clear enough for them to receive it? Are they being told what you're expecting to tell them? Next up is the design familiar to them? Do they recognize the concepts? Is the data being displayed in a way that is digestible and clear because they expect to see the content laid out in that manner? Again, we'll refer back to this one. The next one is, does it delight your audience? In other words, not only does that first impression make somebody happy, but when they start using it and interacting with the view, are they going to see it react in a way that they expect it to? So if I click on a bubble chart, should I see a tooltip of more information, or should it drill down into more or to the next level of detail? These are the things that will ultimately delight your audience. And possibly the most key thing out of all of these 5 tenets is that it should not distract your audience from what you're actually trying to tell them. Ensuring that everything from color, formatting, the text, the titles, everything should be a clear, coherent message to make sure that you're not distracting or confusing anybody or overloading the view. And with that, we're going to go into our first topic, which is going to feel almost like a baseline for most of you in the room. But it's this concept of building a story, this discovery process throughout Tableau. And it all focuses around a few key points, which is, first of all, the things that I'm going to say are flexible, but they start with questions like, what does our data consist of? So getting an understanding of what you're actually trying to convey to your audience. What do you hold behind the scenes? The next is the key thing that gets missed really frequently. So it was in fact last week, I was asked by a customer, how should I build a dashboard? Should I bring up PowerPoint and then start moving my charts around until I'm happy with what the charts are? And then I just asked the question back in terms of, what are you actually trying to display? What are the questions you're actually trying to answer? And I hadn't got that far yet. And it's a bit of a strange process, but really you should be understanding what you're actually trying to ask of your data before you even figure out whether or not it should be a line chart or a bar chart or, God say, a pie chart. And the third and key point is, who is your target audience? For example, this session today is aimed at you as Tableau users, the Tableau community. But is it your manager? Is it the CEO? Is it an analyst on the ground? That setting that detail and what they expect to see is also going to be integral. So how has this worked for years and years and years before Tableau? We can call this the classic BI approach. Old school BI gets banded around, but I don't think it's truly fair. It's also known as kind of that pixel perfect dashboard approach, and it's what I was referring to before. You template out a design and you say, I want to build a dashboard. It should look like this view on the left. Do you know what? We'll figure out the data as we build it. I know it's going to look like this, but do you know what? We'll figure out if that should be sales or profit or size or anything else that you want to do as we get to it. And this approach is fine if you want that snazzy PDF export that you're going to kill plenty of trees doing so in the process. Not when you not when you export the PDF, but when you print it afterwards. But the massive con is this is not insight driven. Eventually there could be the off chance that when you're interacting with this dashboard, you'll stumble across insight, but it's not the easiest route to get to the true insight within your data. I will say for people using phones, happy for you to take pictures. This will be on YouTube and the content is shared afterwards if you want to save your photo and storage space for pictures of the party. So Tableau's flipped this on its head slightly, and the approach should be a little different. And typically we see it go from a data discovery-led approach. And what that means is you say, I want to understand my data. I want to understand what it is that I'm actually looking at. We'll ask questions of this data, and I'll show you a few examples of those in a second. And ultimately, the view we build will be secondary. On this, we should follow the trail of insight, so ask questions of those questions. Once you've asked a question such as, what is my volume at risk over time, there's going to be the follow-up question is, well, what's the leading factor of that risk? That it spiked. Why did it spike? It's gone down. Why did it go down? You should follow those questions as you're building. And finally, combine all of these together in a story, and that will create your dashboard. So the great thing about this is you'll find answers to questions you didn't even consider before you started building. This is actually a true approach to data analysis. But a massive con, and one that I can speak for from myself moving in from an old school to a kind of Tableau world, is this will feel unnatural. It's going to. It's a kind of an insight-led approach first, and because it's flipped it on its head, it will feel unnatural. But once you get used to it, it'll feel much better. So let's start from a dashboard. Again, all of these examples are available on Tableau Public. This doesn't have a name on it, so it's mine. And if I actually follow through from the reverse perspective to explain the questions that led to this dashboard, we can start from saying, what is the current fund state? That's all I wanted to know, one simple question. Then what are the most important categories? So how have they performed? How is each team member performing in my fictional asset management firm? And then who are my top and bottom 5 stocks when it comes to my investment choices? These are the core questions I asked of this data before building the views. Following that, once you've built your story together, put these views together, you can ask those follow-on questions such as, what are my top and bottom per category? What are the top and bottom per team? And what are the underlying drivers behind each stock by using that interactivity? Another great example of this used in the community, and I think it's been referenced several times here, it's actually this profit and loss statement built by Andy Kriebel. And he's asked the same questions, just that's influenced the building process here. So we can see he's basically asked, what is the current versus last year measure? Is it above or below the target that we've set for this measure? What's the month versus the month-over-month value? And then what's the recent trend? He's just asked those same set of questions repeatedly for different KPIs. Now, I love this view for several reasons. One of them, it's clear. It's an easy way to consume KPIs. But another reason is a customer of mine, I showed this to them, and they were so excited. They went, I really want this, and apply it to my own views. So they did that. They went to Tableau Public, downloaded it, reversed engineered it, applied it to their own data. And you should be doing this. This is what it's there for. Just creatively borrow the content that's there for you. And actually, Andy did this himself when building this view. So he creatively borrowed this from somebody called Lindsay Poulter, and she actually created this for the DC Metro. So she created this first. Andy then creatively borrowed it for the profit and loss statement, and subsequently customers have borrowed it from him. So it's a great journey of recycling ideas. Use Tableau Public to steal those ideas just to make it easier on yourselves. Another few examples, just very quickly. Ava Murray of Makeover Monday. If I just look at this European potato industry data on the right there, you can see she's asked the same questions of this data and just said, where are my countries, or where are the countries producing potatoes the most? How has that changed across an area, production over time? And what are the KPIs I'm interested in? Very straightforward. So to wrap up this kind of brief baseline bit that's underlying to everything, you should just remember to find out what's important in your data. Ask the questions that are going to be key relating to that data and your business users, your audience, and then make sure you're conveying it back in a way that your audience understands. So moving on to probably the most impactful thing that you can influence in your dashboard to draw out this insight, we're going to look at color. And the first time I presented this topic was in Las Vegas, in front of a very sizable audience, and it was very scary. But I made sure that U here is in yellow, just to make sure it stands out for the audience. And if you don't know, in America, they spell color without a U, which is incorrect. So color is probably the biggest form of visual perception available for you to use. And some of the elements of color that you can use, the first of which is the hue of that color. And if we look at this view, it's just fading shades that kind of nicely kind of complement each other. But where we've swapped those two colors around, immediately they stand out relatively to each other because they're clashing colors. So you can use colors in a complementary or a clashing way just based on the hue itself. The second way it can be influenced is the intensity of the color itself. This is especially important if your audience or a member of your audience happens to be colorblind. They may not be able to distinguish between the hue of the colors, but changing the intensity of that color means that it still stands out. A great example of this is taken from Andy Kirk's Data-Driven Design Handbook. And actually, if we look at the core of what is this visualization, this is just a bubble chart. It's two bubble charts, side by side, looking at great varieties. But the moment you use that recognizable purple and shade of kind of bluey green, it immediately brings to light that view of grapes. And just color alone, and the structure, does that in its image. It's really, really powerful. And this is an important lesson, which is color should never distract from the story. So one of those key tenets I said at the start, you should always ensure that the color never detracts from the message that you're trying to display. Now this is really important because here at Tableau we're constantly giving you more power, which, as that Spider-Man film told me when I was so young, that means more responsibility. Thank you, Uncle Sam. So we give you more options for color. So in 10.2 we introduced this concept of legends per measure. So I constantly bring this up as an example because I love poking fun at our design team, because that is not good design. Come on, marketing, pull it together. These clashing colors are a way of not using this feature, but it's just showing that you can color individual columns based on whatever it is you're after. In 10.4 we introduced the concept of independent shading for filter, parameters, other sheet objects. All of a sudden you have more options for color. You can add color in places that you couldn't before. And as you saw yesterday, 2018 brings the absence of all colors. It's transparency, and I'm so excited for this. To show my excitement, I've dedicated this whole slide to transparency. Look how transparent it is. A little design joke for you there. So, to show a good example of how transparency can work, this is something looking at airline statistics, so which airlines are delayed or not delayed. And transparency is used here, but it's used in a way that it doesn't subtract from the view. It's kind of almost unnoticeable that there's transparency here in the first place, unless if it's pointed out to you. But it's just got that fading gradient that's actually pretty hard to see on the screen that goes from blue to yellow, that just kind of makes it feel nice. It makes it feel like the sky. It kind of adds something to the theme. So it's a good way of using transparency. Let's look at a bad way of using transparency. Oh yes, this will be possible. It brings new features into Tableau, such as pies in your pies. You can now stack on pie charts on top of each other. 3D effect maps. Yes! Bring out those glasses. Naturally, these are not good ways of using transparency. You can do all sorts of things that you should absolutely not do. But again, it's just tying up to the fact that make sure you're not distracting anybody with your crazy content. Fun fact, I actually managed to line up those pie charts at one point, so each segment was relating to the largest segment outside. It still doesn't add anything analytically or visually. Don't do it. It's a waste of time. There's something else that you should always strive to avoid as well, and it's something that I've come to neatly call unicorn puke. Now, we've all been there. It's this stage in your Tableau journey where you discover the fact that it's easy to build a bar chart, a scatter plot. All of a sudden, you start playing, you start building, and then you notice that there's color. And you go, ooh, color. And you start adding on dimensions, and then you add on more dimensions, and then you use strange color palettes all over the place, and you go, this is really exciting, there's so much color. And then you bring it together in a dashboard, and it looks something like this. And you realize you're a monster. But all is not lost. There's something you can do, a design technique that you can employ, which actually was used on stage today, that is a really powerful way to ensure that this does not happen. And it's something I like to call fade to gray. So one of my favorite colors in design is gray. And if we take this as an example, again, focusing on the message, this is looking at wealth inequality in the United States, and sorry for the quality of the image, it seems like it's been squished. But that purple area is the top 1% of earners in the United States, and the gray is the rest, or the 90%. And you can see that change in time where those charts are diverging, but it really stands out because it's drawing your attention to one thing on this view, because everything else is black and gray. So everything else fades into the background, but the one thing it wants you to pay attention to is the big purple area at the front. And I know what you're saying. You're saying, Tom, there are more than 50 shades of gray. Which ones should I use? I've picked out some for you so you don't have to choose. My favorites are EB, hashtag 9F, and hashtag 68. That nice shading set of colors. There was one that was one number off that, which I was not going to use, but somebody almost made me. Now, I do want to show you very quickly how you can actually make this shading dynamic, because one of the problems, especially if you have lots of data, is just ensuring that when your view changes, the data updates, making sure that this shades dynamically to what you're trying to show. And it all relates to this set of data, which I won't go too much in depth to. I'm just going to apologize and move on and just say Brexit was a bad idea. So, let's start with, I've lost my mouse. So this data is all about something called the Battle of the Thames. And for those of you that have managed to get it out of your memory or thankfully live in a separate country, then this was, you can think of it as grown men on small boats shouting angry things at each other. That kind of sums it up in a nutshell. And some of those angry men are highlighted here. So these are tweets over that time frame, and what you can actually see is where their mentions peaked. So you can see Bob Geldof there, George Osborne, Michael Gove, Nigel Farage. They're the people with, they're the people that stand out over this time frame. But if we were earlier on in this analysis, so earlier on that week, and I went a few days back, we'll see that actually the people who were at the top have changed. So it's Boris Johnson, David Cameron, James Dyson, Great Hoovers, Nigel Farage again still. So you can see how this has changed, and if we kind of just briefly one more time flick through, you see how that's dynamically changed again just to introduce Gordon Brown. So how is this done? I have to look this way, so this is very far away for me. There's a calculation here that drives all of this, and it's incredibly simple. I'll explain this top mentions in a second, but all I'm saying is if it's this top mentions, then use the name, otherwise use other. I can then apply the color palette that I want to my view. So in this case, in my color palette, I actually just assigned the, somewhere down here, the hue circle color palette. That's one of my favorites. And then just made other gray. So other will always be gray. Everything else will use this color palette. Now the thing that ties this all together is this top mentions. And if I just edit this set quickly, sets are one of those powerful things that you saw briefly in the keynote we're going to enhance it by making it dynamic in the near future, which I'm really excited about because not only are sets really useful, they're kind of a forgotten thing in Tableau. They were superseded by level of detail calculations at one point. So most people that I talk to go to level of detail calculations first, or table calculations, when actually a set can do the job quite nicely. And in this case, all I've said is, if they're the top 4 by that value, based on the sum of mentions, that's what the value is, then they're in this set, otherwise they're excluded, they're other. Lastly, the one key thing that drives this all together is just this time filter at the top. That's what we're moving across. You may notice for newer people to Tableau that it's gray. That just means I've applied it to context to make sure it happens before my set filter. Cool. Dynamic shading. Easy. Right, let's get this back up. So a few examples in the community that, again, you can gather inspiration from. This comes from Andy Kriebel again, another one of the 2 of the Makeover Monday team, deadly duo. And what this allows you to do is select parks in the US that you're interested in analyzing. And when you select those parks, it shows you, relative to one another, how they stand out against all the other parks. So a great way of showing relative information. Ava Murray again. This is something where it's an interesting use of gray because what you're doing is saying, I'm looking at air quality based on the ozone layer in Nevada, I believe. And actually, as an audience, I'm not really interested in something that's moderate to good. I can't, that's a good thing. Nobody really gets excited about things that are good. But what I really want to understand is, when is it unhealthy, very unhealthy, or unhealthy for sensitive groups? So by using gray here, you visually ignore this bottom portion here and focus on these key points instead. And lastly, David Perez, who was on stage, he won Iron Viz last year. This was actually his submission, or part of his submission. I've snapped part of it. And something it uniquely shows is it's grayish in color, bluey gray. But it really neatly shows how these heat maps next to each other means that that data can just flow and fade in and stand out using intensity of this color. So just by looking at that, I can immediately see that Greater Lisbon and Algarve are the most popular with tourists. Some other bits on color very quickly. We mentioned it before with hues, but relative color can be key to making a dashboard feel nice. And there are a few things out there online that you can use just to make sure you pick relative colors. The first of those is the color tool for Tableau. This is by Interworks. It automatically generates a color palette that you can put into your preferences file. Or Coolers, which is an online thing. I don't know a better word to describe it, but it looks like this at the bottom, and you basically pick a color and it creates all those colors that are complementary to it for you. Just be lazy, get other people to do it for you is my message. And lastly, for those of you that are fairly new to Tableau, you may not know about picking your screen color. So I'm just going to let this run in the background. But if you have something like a logo where your company has probably paid somebody a hefty sum to design it for you, they've already picked some unique colors that should make sense. So steal them. Pick your screen colors, apply them to your dimensions, and away you go. And this just lives when you double-click any of the elements on the color palette. If you need similar colors, a neat little trick is just to dull it down by changing the saturation of the same color repeatedly. And again, borrow people's work already. So in summary with color, color's a powerful weapon and you should use it wisely. Use it to draw focus to different areas, and you can also use gray to just fade things into the background and make your audience focus on the things that you want them to. So the next topic is possibly the second most important, if I've said that color's the most important, but I've forgotten to give it a title. Oh no. The title is Why Text Matters. Text is a key thing, and it kind of gets lost in this world of visualization because the visuals are there, they're explicit, but without the text, they're almost meaningless at times. And unless if you've somehow managed to avoid it in your adult life, and I'd love to know how, news is everywhere. We constantly consume media, and most of the time in text form. Whether it's real or fake, it always follows this similar format. So if I look at that very quickly, and just look at this news article, almost every news article follows this concept of there's a title, and that gives you that headline information. The subtitle, which just explains the topic slightly further, gives a bit of context, and then finally you have the actual core rich content. So as a reader of articles, you see whether or not the information is relevant to you. You then get taught a bit of a blurb about what you're about to read, and then you've got content. And Viz design should be fairly similar. So if I take this view, looking at political spectrums, you can see it has a title. We've got some content, but the key thing here is there's guidance. And the main thing is that guidance, such as selecting your borough, is what your audience are going to look for as they start trying to consume your content. So if we check out this view by Robert Rouse, this is a unique way to display this data. So again, looking at the political spectrum, this time in the US. And we can see there's the obvious title, the subtitle to give that blurb about what the information's about. We've got the content, but again, piecing this all together is the guidance here, because otherwise you wouldn't know what to do when you actually start looking down this view. But just subtle tips like this mean that as you go to look at it, as you go to look for help of where you should go next, it's there telling you what it means. One last example, purely because there's an unwritten rule of if you do CrossFit, you have to talk about the fact you do CrossFit, and I do CrossFit. Again, title, subtitle describing the information you're about to consume, guidance, because otherwise this would be a bell chart, you wouldn't know where good or bad is, and then the actual content itself. Now to show an example that flips this on its head slightly, this is something by Chris Love. And as the title tells us at the top, this is actually taking the top 100 songs played on Spotify, I believe, and it's taking each word from the lyrics of those songs and visualizing them like this. There's something that's really important here, which is text has a deeper layer within Tableau, which is there's that top layer that's telling you what it is, framing this set of data, but you don't really discover the value behind this until you start interacting with it. And then Tooltips brings this to life. So if you didn't know, the word nah, is it a word, features in Hey Jude 84 times. I like to think Chris did not count that. That would have been a long time-consuming piece of work. So tooltips are incredibly powerful. And this is an example from Jewel Laurie. And we can see here, this is looking at baby names over time. And if we look at the trend over time for Linda, we can actually see that year-over-year comparison as well as the total value exactly by hovering over. There's no cluttered view of that year-over-year measure trying to kind of shoehorn it into this view. There's no up and down arrows trying to show that. It's just, if you're interested in seeing that figure, it's surfaced through a tooltip. Another example, I've visualized some Nintendo data because I'm a bit sad. But we can see here that as you hover over these points, it then reveals what the game is, how much it was sold, which system it was, and the year of its release. So all that information surfaced through the tooltips, so your view is simple and still easily digested. So where next? Where now, actually, with Tableau? So in 10.4, we actually introduced something which allows you to select categories within your tooltips, and relative pieces of information will also select with it. This is a highly underused feature within Tableau, which I'll show you within a minute, and how you can use it. Also in 10.5, we introduced Viz in Tooltips. So this is something from an actual dashboard of mine that I lead my own investment choices off the back of. I'm wildly unsuccessful as an investor, so the dashboard is clearly broken. But there are tooltips within this that if I say I'm interested in that point, tell me more about it, then I get that information revealed to me through the tooltip. And it can still be visual and expressive. In fact, I think my Viz in tooltips are better designed than some people's dashboards. Brag right there. So let's show you how this works. That's going to be difficult from here. But if I look at this view, we actually have 333,500 records in this view. The only thing that I can logically derive from this information is that the wider the stocks are, the more volatile they are, and then the average change for all stocks is about 0.07% there. But once I start hovering over and interacting with these, for example, I can look at this here, and I can see AstraZeneca, I can see its close price and its change on that particular day. But if I select it and select AstraZeneca, you can see it highlights all the points that relate to AstraZeneca. So now I can see AstraZeneca's average change is about 0.1%, and I can get an idea of how volatile AstraZeneca alone was as a stock. But let's take this a step further. If I look at this sheet here, all this is the date, the sum of close values. I've got my individual stock names over here, and a filter for the last 6 months. What I can actually do is say, if I go to my tooltips, and that's popped up over here, let me drag this over here. As of 10.5, what you're able to do is just say, I'd like to insert a sheet, and you can select from all the other sheets in your view. So I'm going to say my 6-month tooltip. Let's just make this bigger so everyone can see. Now you can see there are a few parameters here. So this is the sheet that I'm pulling through. I'm just going to change the dimensions ever so slightly. So say that the height should be 200. I don't want it to overload the view. And then I want to pass through name, so the name of the stock through as part of the tooltip. I'll press OK. And now if I look at that same point of AstraZeneca, it gives me further context because I see the 6-month trend line of that data. So I could still go, show me all the points of AstraZeneca, and now I've got a full picture of what happened to this stock value over the last 6 months. So really quick, really easy to do, and really powerful when you get into it. Let's swap back. Cool. So remember, text can be key to providing that bit of context, that bit of familiarity to your users. It should be used in an additional obvious way that means that you're not distracting from the message, but making your message more easy to consume. And you'll always need something just to guide your users. And just remember to use tooltips to provide that additional level of detail. Now the last key topic that I'm going to take you through today is layout and chart types. And I'll start with this. It comes from the Financial Times. And this is called the visual vocabulary. And if I refer back to the start when we were saying things, people should recognize views. I mean, the Financial Times' sole purpose is to display information for people so that they understand the article that they're reading. And what they've done is they've tried to bucket bits of information and chart types into these buckets. So they can say, right, if I'm picking to say I've got some data that I want to look at the change over time, then I should probably use a line or a line and column chart, something obvious that the audience will recognize. Likewise, if I was using a ranking, I could use a bar chart or something along those lines. Now this leads me on to possibly one of my favorite online memes, which is the distracted boyfriend meme. So for those of you that recognize this or have cats as well, you might feel this pain. But the visual editor of The Guardian took on this challenge when this kind of hit its peak and applied it to visual analytics to create my all-time favorite, which is this. I'll just give you a second there. How many times do you encounter this? To put this into Tableau terms, you've got your sales, you've got your profit. Probably the easiest, most relatable, best way for the data is you put your sales as your columns, your colors onto, your profit onto colors, and people can now see that ranking of sales and where profit is bad. But sometimes you really, really need to show that exploding bubble chart. And it's okay. Sometimes it's okay. But it needs to make sure that it adds something to your actual audience. To cover this very briefly, the technology that drives Show Me. So Show Me isn't an extensive list of everything you can do in Tableau. But it does use some of this technology to try and lead you to the best view of the data. But it doesn't always get it right. This is something I built a few years ago for the Grand National. And there's no horse racing chart in Show Me. I've been talking to the devs for a couple of years now, and it's just not made it just yet. Maybe in the extensions. But when we come to understanding the true chart to display, the correct way to display your data, actually when it comes to Tableau, if you understand what the visual engine is going to do, then it opens up this whole world of unlimited design potential. So let's show you how to create a horse racing chart. Just think about how exciting your KPI views will be on Monday morning. So let's start with an empty viz, and I need to zoom in to make sure I'm using the right thing. Right, so I've got data here on the Grand National. I can see different things like my horse names. Let's ask this first question of our data. What are the horses in the Grand National? So I'll double click. Here are my horses. But actually I just want them on detail, just for now. I then may want to know what are the career earnings of all these horses. So I'll scroll down. And we have prize money. So let's just drag this into columns. And what I have is my prize money of all my horses. So in total, they've earned 10.5 million over time, which is quite a bit of money. Well done, horses. Now, if I actually change this to a circle, and we know the outcome, so we're cheating slightly, you can kind of see that there's some sort of very straight line circle race going on right now. It's probably less of a race and more of a follow the leader. But it's already beginning to take shape. And actually, if I add an index here and just change this to be at the horse name layer. So this is actually just assigning a random value to my dots. All of a sudden, you can see this coming to life a little bit. We've got our dots spread out. And we can see that this one over here, this particular dot, is winning quite drastically. So let's bring it to life now. All I'm going to do is just say, instead of circles, I want to see shapes. I'm actually going to put horse name onto shapes. If you need to assign your shapes, you can put them in here. And for those of you that don't know, there's a folder in your Tableau repository that you can put shapes into, so you can get your custom shapes through. Fun fact about these horses is these are actually the correct color for their jockeys and the horse type. I had a colleague of mine color that in for me, and I owe her a lot of money. But now we see this has come to life. All we need to do is just change this and change the background to something a bit more grassy. And there we have our horse race. Super quick, super easy, completely irrelevant, but at least you now know. So the last thing just to complete this off is I just had a background image. I can't actually find where I put that background image anymore, so I didn't show it. But it doesn't matter because when transparency comes out, you won't need it anyway. You can just have your floating horses over whatever race course you choose to have. But this all leads us on to probably the core thing to take away here, which is at all times you should always be wondering this concept of design versus efficiency. And this is an iconic viz created by Rodi Zakovic. It won Viz of the Week a couple of years ago now, actually. But you can see how just using Freddie Mercury in the Queen logo, you have this iconic image of Freddie punching up, and then you can see all the different song lyrics, or which ones had the most words in each one of the Queen songs. It really adds something to this story. But if you take those two things away, you actually see that the message gets a bit distracted. It actually takes things away if you take away those core drivers. And Rodi went through this story of basically saying, and it's actually on his blog, Tableau, or Data, Tableau and Me, where he won Viz of the Week, I think several times in a couple of months. And he became obsessed with this concept of curving every single line that he could possibly do, both for Tableau Public and when he was creating business reports. And he became so obsessed with this concept of curving every line he possibly could that he actually started to recognize that he was probably damaging his own work. So using Makeover Monday, he reflected on this and actually, using that same potato sector data we saw before, created this. Now this isn't going to excite anyone, it's not going to make you jump up and down with joy. But if this is a business report and you're just looking at that year-over-year change in the potato sector, then this is going to be a really sensible way to consume this data. You see that total production, and then the red just tells you if production has fallen in each one of these countries over time. So as exciting as it can be to create something flashy, to draw your audience's attention to something, just make sure that it's relevant to what you're doing and the content is clear enough that it actually adds to the message. The last thing on layouts is one of my favorite features that we've added fairly recently. It was referred to on stage a fair amount as well, which is margins and padding. So margins and padding means that you can now add or kind of pixel perfect adjust that space around the views in order to separate your views in a neat and sensible way. So Klaus used this fairly heavily in his design techniques today. I think it took him possibly 2 of the minutes of his 20 just to ensure that all his margins were exactly as he planned. And it really contributes to the end design. Now this is something I'm not ashamed to admit that it was a little bit difficult in Tableau in the old world. If we actually look out for these layer, or in what's in the layout of this viz, you can see there's lots of text objects here. And what I've actually done is floated lots of text objects over this view to create that padded effect. Slightly embarrassing looking back now. So as of 10.4, this transforms that when you use a tiled, and then you can use the spacing and margins, it just makes it so much easier to manage the content of your viz. And I love this feature. So, with layout and chart types, just remember that your choices should always be driven by the appropriateness of the story. You should ask yourself, does it meet your audience's requirements? Does it display the answer you're looking to achieve in an effective way? And if you add up all these things together, you saw today Klaus hasn't even used Tableau for a year, you too could be on stage at Iron Viz with somebody like me wearing one of these t-shirts stood awkwardly behind you. So in summary, Tableau's turned everybody into a designer. Design and UX should always follow those basic principles for success that we saw before. And remember to always keep in mind things like the story. What color choices are you making? How much text? What does your text add to your view? Which particular layout and chart types will you ultimately choose? But I know you're all sat here and you're thinking, Tom, I want more. More, I need it, more. This is almost the last session. I need to learn as much as I can. And I hear you. And actually, when I first created this session, I tried to list out every single type of design tip or trick or technique or tweak that you could add to your dashboards. And this isn't even a comprehensive list. I just got really tired of typing. But there are some things here that you can employ to your own dashboard, some things that you can take away. But there's an important lesson here, which is everything I've spoken about today, plus all of these features, will grow over time, including your content. So if I talk about this story very quickly, this is a dashboard that I mentioned before in terms of making investment choices, and it started off like this. And this was looking at the position of stocks across every day for 12 months, and I just wanted to get an estimate of volatility. I have my 15 and 30-day flags to say whether or not I should look at buying or selling a stock value. And I can select those stocks and find out this information. I was really pleased with how this looked here. And then I put it on Twitter. And then something bugged me. And if you can't spot it from there, I don't blame you. It's quite small. It's right there. I managed to misspell between twice. I'm going to blame that on copy and paste or fat fingers. I'm not quite sure. But either way, it was a mistake, but I could go back, I could change it. But more appropriately to this story, a few months on, I found that actually I wasn't using this dashboard in a way that I thought I would. It didn't actually meet my own business needs. So I went back, I changed things, the flags have gone to the top, I've separated them out to buys and sells, and then I've got a quadrant instead that shows when I select one of those stocks where it is in this quadrant. And the Vizzes tooltip that we saw before also relates to this view. And now I use this all the time, and it's far more appropriate to what I'm actually trying to do. So there's a key lesson here, which is you're not going to get it right first time, unless if you're Klaus. But you're going to iterate multiple times, and each time think back to those features, think back to the story, think back to the appropriateness, and just use that concept of fast iteration that Tableau lets you do by failing fast and building quickly. So last thing, I just want to thank these people in particular. Their content inspired a lot of the views that you saw today. They're great people. Check them out on Tableau Public and Twitter. And last point from me, you've probably heard it a million times, but please review this session. It's in the details screen in the TC app. I believe you have to press next a few times if you get an error. Please do this. I'd love to hear your feedback. Otherwise, thank you very much. See you all soon.